So to anybody that's new today and doesn't know who I am, I'm Stacey Teece. I'm a trust fundraising consultant with Tree Fundraising, and they've been around for 14 years helping people and organisations like yours that want to look into high value fundraising. So that's major donors, trusts, and also capital appeals. I've been in the sector for around 20 years, and most of that has been in trust fundraising. And I've been helping large organisations, national organisations, and small local organisations to have a look at their trust fundraising. I've also been a trust fundraiser myself, and a major donor manager, and all sorts of things in my work life. So I have a kind of a broad overview of what everybody's going through at the minute. It's really tough out there, isn't it? So let's start with that. How's everybody feeling? Everybody feeling good, feeling positive? It's spring, we're all having a really good time. Is anybody having any tough moments at the minute that they want to share and want to talk about together? Please feel free to pop that in the chat and we can have a look at some of those things together. If you've got any questions for me that you'd like to put forward, also feel free to drop those in the chat for me today, and we can have a look about how we can all help each other. I'm finding it challenging to find suitable trusts and foundations to apply for. Is that because you don't know where to look or don't know where to start? I suppose, how old is your trust and grants program? Are you just starting out? And those things might just help us have a little look at that question for you. I mean, it's really challenging at the moment, isn't there? There's so many trusts that are closing down or pausing with work that they're doing. So it can be tough to know where to start with all the kind of negative things that are out there about how tough it is in the sector. I promise you there are still opportunities out there. The people that are closing and are pausing are less than 5% of the opportunities that are out there. So there are still places we can look and places we can go. It's just knowing that, isn't it? Ray says it's tough, but senior leaders don't always understand our challenges. It's really tricky. It's really tricky out there to try and get senior leaders to understand the challenges in the sector, particularly at the moment. Trust has always been something, it's the bread and butter of fundraising, a lot of places would say. And it's really tough out there at the minute, and trying to convey that to your senior leaders when they're also having a lot of challenges on them from top down, about how to, make the most of opportunities, and they need to get the money in as well to put that pressure on you. It's really tricky. Any clues? Let's have a look, John. Any clues as to the new Reaching Communities application process coming soon? And Kate very helpfully says, I believe it will be launched on the 1st of April. Yes, that's what I've heard as well, that it's potentially on the 1st of April. I think everybody's still waiting, aren't they, to hear of what's going to happen with that one. The National Lottery is such a key player for a lot of people, and a lot of people's first port of call when they're looking to make trust applications. So yeah, we're all waiting for that one. And if I hear anything, if you're linked with me on LinkedIn, I'll share anything that I hear on LinkedIn. Cheryl, I'm new in my role. I've never worked in trust before, learning as I'm going, so I'm here to soak up the info. Well, welcome. I love trust fundraising. Always have. The 20 years, it's always the thing that I come back to. I've done corporate fundraising and major donors, which I also love, but it's always trust fundraising that I come back to. There's just something about it. So I hope that you enjoy it too, Cheryl. We do have on our website, actually, some videos for people who are just starting out. If I share that in the chat for you, you might find that useful. It's our Fundraising 101 series, which is a set of videos for people who are just starting in trust fundraising, so you know where to look first and get some ideas. So hopefully things like that might be useful to you. I've learnt doing these live webinars, but I can't read and speak at the same time. So if I go quiet, it's because it's because I'm reading something. We're new to trust and foundations fundraising. We've held a handful of grants from foundations, but the processes haven't been anything different from grant fundraising. We need to learn everything pretty much from you. So again, like Cheryl, some of those videos on our website, on our YouTube channel, you might find really helpful. And also signing up to the Tree Fundraising newsletter. We put a lot of bits and bobs in there that you might find really useful. And always feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Nikki, interested in any advice for CICs trying to find funding? It's tricky for CICs, isn't it? It's really tricky because a lot of them are kind of discounted from the opportunities that are out there. If you have a community foundation near to you, I definitely have a chat with them and see if they have any open grants that might be good for CICs. That's usually the first place I go if I'm working with smaller organisations, because community foundations like to keep it really local. And also the Charity Excellence Framework have a lot of things on there for small organisations, particularly CICs. Let me see if I can find the link in case you're not already aware. Charity Excellence Framework. And all of their resources are absolutely free. You just have to sign up to get access. I'm just going to pop that in the chat for you. If I hit reply and pop that in the chat. That's another good resource as well. Really, it's finding those opportunities that are out there and having a look through and seeing whether CICs are discounted. They often are, but you might drop lucky. Those are the two best places that I would start having a look for that and seeing if that helps. Ray, we're struggling as we currently have limited capital projects and lots of funders don't seem to like to fund core costs, or is that a myth? Yeah, well, it's not a myth, but you don't have to have capital projects. You can just have your projects that you want to fund. So core costs, funders often don't like to fund core costs as they see that as not necessarily going towards funding the problem that they want to solve. All trusts funders are out there wanting to solve a particular problem, and so they feel like paying a CEO's expense or to keep the lighting on, that might be seen as a core cost, and that doesn't actually get to the crux of what the problem is. But your projects, so the things that you're doing to solve those problems, so maybe you're running a mentoring program, or you're running accommodation for homeless people, or a food bank and things like that. Those are your projects. So you absolutely can go to trust funders for your project costs, which could include an element of core costs. I'm doing a webinar soon for the Hospice Income Generation Network, and hopefully I'll be able to turn that into something that I can then put out for you, all about how you can position core costs into your project costs. So for example, if we were talking about keeping the lights on, then you could package that up in a hospice setting as, if we can't keep the lights on, we can't keep our patients warm, then we're not providing a good service. We're not enabling those people who have come to us for respite care to stay safe and warm and in a really nurturing, loving environment. So you can package up those core costs into your project costs and present those. So don't feel like you have to have capital projects. Some trusts say that they don't fund capital projects. So have a look at your projects, see what's fundable out of those. We have a webinar that's about project design for trust funders and why they should be involved in that project design that you might find useful. Let me find the link for that while we're talking about it, and I'll pop that in the chat as well. So you've got that. And look at how you can package up those projects, whether you've got projects, whether you need to develop them more into something that's fundable. That webinar will help you do that. And then how you can incorporate your core costs into your project costs so that they're going towards the solution and of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's what really will appeal to trusts. But it's hard to just get core costs on their own. I absolutely agree. But don't forget that project costs can also be funded. It's not just all about capital ones. Fiona, I'm finding it challenging to find trusts who will support us, as we're also a grant making charity, but those we grant to cannot apply to the trust directly as they're not registered charities. Yeah, it is tough. A lot of trusts won't allow you to make grants off the back of what they're doing, because they want to make sure that their funds are being spent in the way that they want to be spent. So a lot of trust funders will think, you know, oh, hang on, where's that money going? I can't keep on top of where it's going. So yeah, it is really, really tough. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere I can point you that might help with those kind of I mean, the lottery is usually a good place to start, but I'm not sure with the new, everything that's coming out, as we've talked about, the reaching communities, and they often don't let you put them back out there again for grants. Again, I would talk to your local community foundation. It might be something that you can do to work with your community foundation to set up a grant pot. And they might be able to work with you on that other charities can access. And also they might be able to help you with funding for it, but you're quite limited when you're looking at making onward grants. The only other way that you could do it is have a look at corporates and see whether they want to work with you for a grant pot. We've done that in the past at some of the organisations that I've worked with, or major donors. Sometimes major donors will work with you as well, to be able to put money into a pot that you can then make grants off the back of. So those might be two places that you can have a look that you might not have thought about. Kelly, Get Grants have a really useful webinar about core costs. Only cost £12 to access from their demand resources, and he talks a lot about bringing core costs into your projects. Amazing. Oh, thank you for sharing the link to that as well. Like I said, we are hoping to have one as well off the back of the Hospice Income Generation Network conference that I'm doing next week, where we're talking about, you know, turning core costs into project costs. So hopefully we'll have something to be able to get that to you as well in a few weeks' time. That'll be really exciting. And I'm working on at the moment a webinar about prospecting and where to look for trusts and foundations, particularly when it is really tough, and how to make your projects really stand out. So hopefully we'll have some good resources out there for you. That will be really helpful. I'm just having a look back through and see if I've missed anything. If anybody's got any more questions or want to hop on the video and ask anything, please feel free to do so. Has anybody got any good wins they want to share with us? That's always a nice one. Because it's not all doom and gloom out there, is it? It does feel like it at the moment with all the trusts that are closing or pausing, but I've heard of some really good wins at the moment as well. Okay, that's one thing I'm really struggling with at the moment, making application text really stand out. Do you have any tips? So for me, it's focusing on making sure that your application really ticks all the boxes for the funder that you're going for. You will all know that the best way to make you stand out is to make sure that your application isn't scattergun, that it's really tailored to that funder that you're putting it in front of. Stories are another really great way to make your application stand out. You're trying to make a connection with someone in a really short space of time. So to be able to use those stories of your beneficiaries that you might have to make you stand out is really good. Another way, and a lot of things that funders are wanting to see at the moment is how you're using your beneficiaries to shape your projects. So it's a question that I'm seeing all the time now, is how have you involved your beneficiaries in your project design? And I think that's really beneficial because, you know, they're not always victims in this process. They are the solution. Those are the people that are going to signpost you to the best ways that they need help and support. So to be able to use them in your project design, I think really makes your application stand out, because you are absolutely putting forward the voice of your beneficiaries. And then the other thing also is to think about sustainability. So lots of people think that sustainability is just environmental sustainability, what you're doing to help the environment, which is absolutely something that you should be focused on, but also the sustainability of your project. If you were to lose money tomorrow, how can you ensure that your sustainability, your project carries on, and that you have a legacy? So any trust or grant that want to make an investment into your project, into your organisation, can absolutely see that you thought about the long-term sustainability of your project, and how they can help you achieve that. And that's really kind of ticking a lot of boxes for funders at the moment, that want to see those kind of things. And just, your project inside and out. I talk about this a lot if you've joined me on these lives before, but trust funders are an underutilized resource when you're looking at project design and when you're bringing your projects together. I think a trust fundraiser should be involved in any project that wants to be fundable, because you are the bridge between what the service delivery team and a funder is looking for. You're the one who knows how to speak both of those languages. So, use that to your advantage, use your passion to come out, make sure you have those stories in place, and that you're really talking about the solution that your project is going to bring, and how the funder can help you do that. So I hope that helps. I think one of the biggest wins for us was to be one of the King's Award GSK Impact winners for 2025. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Well done. They are really competitive. Really, really competitive. Cheryl, can you recommend any courses for newbies? Oh, I'll have a little think about that one. If anyone can help Cheryl with some recommendations. And like I said, there's lots of resources on our Tree Fundraising website, so lots of those are free. So have a little look through and see what you can find there. Or obviously, always reach out to me if I can be of any help. But I'll have a think about courses, if there's any good ones that I've been to. I mean, having done it for 20 years, some of the courses I went on as a newbie probably don't exist anymore, which is makes me feel very old. But I will have a little think and see if I can think of anything. We'll come back to you about Cheryl, but please do feel free to share any in the chat with Cheryl if anybody can recommend anything we've been on. That's really good. Megan, we were recently turned down for a grant because we didn't mention how we included our community in building that project, even though we did. We've been encouraged to reapply as soon as possible with this information added. Absolutely. It like I said, it's something that I'm seeing more and more, particularly if you're applying to the lottery. They have a whole question around it now in their application. And I think as trust funders, we should be making sure that beneficiaries are included, or the voice of the community, whoever you are that you're working with, should be included, and you should be demonstrating and showing how your projects have been built with their voices in mind. It's really important, and I think it really helps your application stand out if they don't already ask for it, which a lot do. It can really, really help make you stand out. Frank, I've been giving funders a copy of our funding pipeline, what we have, successful, unsuccessful applications, and what we're currently working on, and grants we've identified are a good fit. I think this has helped with building transparency and trust. Have you got any examples of where that's really worked for you, Frank? Has it helped you make a good connection? Has it helped you solicit a donation? Because that would be really interesting to see, because that's not something I've come across before. Some funders do ask for, if you've got any applications in the pipeline and what was successful and unsuccessful, so they can gauge what an impact their grant would make. But I've never come across anybody sending it out willingly with their application. So it would be really interesting to see what feedback you've had, and if you've had any success off the back of it. It's not necessarily something I would recommend people doing as a kind of the norm. I think it depends on what funders that you're going for. Again, if they're asking for it, absolutely always send it. And I think it's always good to say that you've had some funding in and be upfront with that if you have. I'm not sure I would send a full pipeline, but Frank, you might prove me wrong here, and show how good it's been for you. Especially the grants we've identified are a good fit. Frank says it works with certain funders. I put it on a presentation, which is visual with our impact report. Really interesting. That's really interesting. It's not something I've come across before that people are doing as a matter of course. So yeah, keep us abreast with that, Frank, and what's happening with that, and give us some feedback as you're getting more and more feedback to see. And I agree, it would probably work with certain funders, particularly those where you've had success. Not sure I'd be shouting about my unsuccessful applications, but you know, these things are out there for us to try and see what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, keep us updated with that. If you come along to some of the lives again, we've got another one in April on the 29th. So yeah, come and tell us more when you get more feedback. Becky, pessimism about trust fundraising is really high at the moment. Are you seeing any signs of optimism? I'm particularly thinking of how to motivate fundraising colleagues that are new to trust fundraising. I completely agree. I mean, I'm quite a positive person, particularly when it comes to trust fundraising, because I have worked in the sector for 20 years and I've seen lots of comings and goings and lots of changes. And then when we had some of the flooding over the past few years, when we've had a lot of things that have been happening overseas, trust tended to change what they were doing to focus on those kind of emergency appeals. And so the fundraising opportunities in the UK really went really low, and we had a period where it felt like nothing was ever going to pick up again. And it does pick up again. I think because of the pandemic, when lots of people who couldn't do some of the more traditional ways of fundraising, your events, you know, corporates were all locked down and not being able to do things, turned to trust fundraising, which has put an enormous amount of pressure on the trust fundraising sector, and those funders that were really generous over the pandemic, and some of them increased the amount of money that they were giving, but they saw between 20 to 30% increase in the number of applications that they were receiving. So that has caused a lot of them now to pause and rethink about what they're doing. That doesn't mean that they're going to close forever. It just means they're having a rethink about how they can do it. And in some cases, that's a good thing, because some application processes can be really arduous and really hard, you know, especially for a very small amount of money. How many times have we had to submit applications that were pages and pages and pages long for, you know, £1,000? So in a lot of ways, them pausing and thinking about how they could do things better is a good thing. But I think it just makes us all feel a little bit jittery, particularly at the moment. But it will get better. It always does. It's just about holding your nerve, and there are still opportunities out there. You know, there's lots of smaller trusts out there that aren't feeling this overwhelm, that are a little bit more hidden. You know, have a look through the Charity Commission, put stuff on the Ludlow portal if you haven't already done that, because that goes to a wealth of trusts that are out there, and as they've just acquired the HSBC Trust kind of department, and there'll be even more trusts on there, and some of those you can do with just one application. You can tailor it to each individual trust, but you can also put one application for your project out there, and they will try and find the best match. It's not the quickest way to do it, and I'd always recommend having a look at those trusts individually, and seeing whether you can apply to them individually. But if you just want to get some things out there and try and get the ball rolling, that's a really good way of doing it. Keeping your trust fundraisers motivated, again, is really tricky. I think for me, it's just reminding them what an amazing job they're doing, that it's really tough at the moment. And even though you're getting, I'm sure, a lot of pressure from top down to bring that money in, it's continuing to be brave and pushing back and letting them know how challenging it is out there in the sector at the moment. I promise it won't last forever, and that trust fundraising is still a really good investment for your organisation. And if you haven't started trust fundraising, now is the time to dip your toe into the water and get yourself out there. It's not impossible to get money, it's just harder than it was. But I commend all of you out there doing trust fundraising at the moment. Did I answer the seeing signs of optimism? Am I seeing signs of optimism? I'm always optimistic. So I always try to look for signs of optimism. I think the fact, like I said, that it's less than 5% of all trust funders out there that are making these changes, that are pausing or closing, is really good. That means there are still lots and lots of opportunities out there. I think, like we talked about, some of the changes that are being made will be a good thing in the long run. It will help trust fundraising become a lot more streamlined, and it will encourage us to all work together collaboratively on partnership applications. So we're streamlining what we're putting out there and we're working smarter. And I think, again, thinking about those applications that we are making sure we're not doing a scattergun approach, making sure that we're being really tailored with what we're putting out there, also helps our success rate, particularly when it's a little bit tough out there at the moment. But we just have to keep going. It will get better. I really promise it will. Nikki, with regards to pipelines, what's the best way to go about gauging likely success with funds? How likely? Not sure how to start putting levels of likely success. How can that be calculated? There's lots of different ways you can go about doing that. I always divide them up into four categories. So you're looking at your warm funders that you've been successful with before, that you've had really good onward conversations with, and maybe you're going for year 2, year 3, year 4 funding. Those are your warm ones, and they're kind of 80 to 100% that you might get something off the back of them if you've had those really good ongoing conversations. Then you've got your lapsed funders, so funders who you've had success with before, but maybe you haven't had success within a few years. Maybe you haven't had anybody in post for a little while, so you haven't been able to have those ongoing conversations. And those are good ones that you can pick up again with. And I would say those ones are probably 50% plus, depending on how much their grant programs have changed since you last had a successful application with them. Then you have your cold donors or potentials who you have no connections with, you've had no success with in the past, and those are probably your kind of maybe 10% you might get. I mean, it used to be cold used to be 1 in 10 you might get a successful application off the back of. So not impossible, but you know, it's always best to be working with those where you have some previous connection, because those are the ones that are more likely going to come off. But it's never impossible to get an absolutely cold donation. And then there's those sort of middly warm, cool ones where you might have a connection through a trustee, or you might have worked with them on a previous project, even if you hadn't had any funding from. And those you could probably put at the kind of 20 to 30%, because you've already started to build those relationships with, and it feels like you might have some traction with them. It's all about building relationships. A lot of people with trust fundraising think that it's not about relationship building, you know, it's not a major donor sort of thing, but it actually is, and it's getting more so, that building relationships, you know, picking up the phone and making that call to someone before you put an application in is really, really important. So that's the way I tend to do it. I tend to do it on percentages, and have a look at if I've had success with them before, how much that was, and whether I would get that money again, whether they've changed their funding criteria, whether they're now giving out smaller grants, and factor all that in. It can only ever be a guess. I've had many where I've put in for an absolutely cold application thinking, oh, I've got a 10% success rate here, and it's come out, and sometimes they've even offered you more. So it's not an exact science, but it does help you to build your pipeline and have a kind of an idea of what's coming in. As a trust fundraiser, I've always said we need those wins that we never knew we were going to win to hit our targets. It's those kind of unprecedented things that come out that we weren't expecting. Oh, Becky, you're welcome. I love your advice to continue being brave with applications. Absolutely do. If you think you are an amazing fit for an application and you can prove it, go for it. Pick up that telephone. If the trust funder says, please, we like people to speak to us. Start making those connections and be brave. You know, it's a long way from when I first started trust fundraising 20 years ago, when it was a lot of solicitors and they didn't want to get contacted. They didn't want you to telephone them or email them. They just wanted to get your application in, and you might never hear anything ever again. Or you might be really lucky and get something 6 to 8 months down the line. You get a little check come through. Now it really is all about building those relationships and being brave and putting yourself out there. One of the best things you can do as a trust fundraiser is go along to the Meet the Funder events, ask your questions, put yourself in front of those potential funders. Go to any Q&A sessions that a funder might be having, again, where you can ask your questions, talk a little bit about your project, and just get yourself out there. Make sure that your fundraising websites, your websites in general, that your social media is all talking about the impact that your work has. So if trusts are saying they don't accept unsolicited applications, or you want to raise your profile in a certain sector, your social media and your website will help you do that. It will help you boost your profile, and particularly if you know a trust that you want to kind of really get on the radar of, you can also use some of the language that they use on their website. So if they're looking for projects that they can fund, yours will come up in searches and they'll start to see that the work that you're doing. So even if it says no solicited applications, there are ways and means that you can get round. And some of them will accept expression of interests. And I'm finding that more and more now, that although they say no unsolicited applications, they say if you're a really good fit, they're willing to hear from you and will accept those expressions of interest. So there are often ways that you can get around that no unsolicited applications. And if you have trustees that are really great and will really help you, and they know somebody on their trustee board, use that to get in there as well. Yeah, continue to be brave. We're all brave, aren't we? Particularly at the moment when things are tough. We're all being really brave and doing what we can to keep going. Nikki, any thoughts on using AI tools in trust fundraising? I'm reluctant to begin down that path, but I think it's others. But if others think it's beneficial, I'm happy to be convinced. So what's my thoughts on AI? I think AI in trust fundraising will become more and more. Personally, I think it's a tool that can be utilised. I don't think it will ever replace a really good trust fundraiser who is involved in the project design, who know how to talk to trust. I think trusts are, on the whole, embracing it more and more. The lottery, we've talked about the lottery a lot on this one, haven't we? The lottery are saying that they're willing to accept applications that have been used for AI, with AI. And I think for some small organisations, maybe where there are only volunteers doing all this, they don't have professionals like you and I that are putting in those applications, AI can absolutely be a lifesaver. I think what AI does for me is helps me take a funder's priorities and all of the information that they might have on their website, and helps me to see really quickly how I could structure something to help match it. So I don't use it to help me write, because I'm the writer and I've honed that writing talent over the last 20 years, but it helps me get those thought points to put something across. So it's a kind of a starting point to make sure what I already think is definitely true, or maybe will show me ways that the work might fit with a funder that I might not have thought of. But that all depends on how you have trained that AI. So it needs to know your writing style, it needs to know about your projects, so you can feed it information so it knows that. Obviously, don't put anything there that's identifiable or any beneficiary information in there, because we're still not quite sure how AI is used beyond how we're using it. But I find it a really good starting point. The best thing I find it for is when you have an application form that has a word count, because you can pop what you've written into AI and say, can you make this fit within the word count? And that has saved me hours of trying to figure out how to make something shorter to fit within word count. So I've written it, put it in there, and then asked if it can just tweak it. Sometimes you have to tweak it again because AI isn't still quite like a human writing just yet. And again, it depends how much you've been using your AI system and how much you've taught it to write and speak like you do. But I find it amazingly for if you've got a really tight word count, because isn't it frustrating when you write something really good and it doesn't fit in the word count, or the word count is different on an application form than they said it was, because I've had that as well. It just helps me, when you're sat there in the midst of despair because you can't get something to fit in the application form, it takes all that pressure out of being able to do that. And for small charities, or where charities only have volunteers, I think it's an absolutely amazing tool. And again, the Charity Excellence Framework has some really good webinars and a useful tool on there about AI. And Patricia's just very kindly said about the Get Grants webinar about AI. That's another good one to go along to. I dip your toe in. If you haven't done it before, you don't have to do anything and send it to anybody. But just see how it feels when you have a play with it. Put in some information, put in some matching criteria and see what it does and whether it extracts what you think it would do. I think building up your use over time in the ways that you feel comfortable. I think Trust will always worry about people using AI a lot, and I think it still needs to sound like you, and it needs to come from you as the trust fundraising expert. You're the one building those relationships with trusts. You're the one that's gathering all that information and know how you want your projects to look and sound when you're presenting them. But I think AI has its uses, absolutely, and I always use it as a starting point to kind of kick me off. Now, what advice would you give in terms of a good structure to follow for the generic question of tell us about your project, especially if some funders only ask that question to give them insight about us as well as the project? So I would start with, do you have your case for support? Case for support will give you all the information you need to be able to answer these questions without having to rethink about it every time that you do it. So your case for support, for those that don't know, I'm sure lots of you do and you have amazing ones, is your kind of organisation and project on a page. And it's the first thing I do whenever I join an organisation or whether I have a new project. And you look at kind of what your organisation's mission and vision is, a little bit about your history, a little bit about what you want to achieve, what the problem is, how you're going to do that, and what the successes that you've had in doing that in the past. And then you can go into your project. But then having that structure will then allow you to answer that question really, really easily, because you'll have all that information there. And that might be a way that you use AI. So you might have all that information that you've gathered, that you've collected, you've got it all in your case for support. You might pop that into the AI and you might say, tell me about the project. What's the project? And that might give you a starting point for answering that question. It's a good way of testing out whether AI would work for you. So you tweak it so it sounds like you, sounds like your organisation, sounds like your tone and your brand voice. But I think the key to answering those kind of questions is to have a really good case for support kind of in your back pocket, because then you don't have to worry about those questions. You have all that information ready to go. So you're looking at your kind of vision, mission, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, history, how you've been trying to solve it. And you could even do what would happen if you weren't there to solve it, and then go into your project kind of underneath that. You can also do more generic stuff like your contact details, your website, your email address, just so it's all there. If you're filling in an application form, you can then copy and paste it into the application form from the different sections of what you're doing. But I would really start with your case for support. It's I love putting together case for supports. It's not the most fun thing, but I really enjoy putting together case for supports. It's the first thing I do whenever we have a new project. I will pull together a case for support for that project with all the generic information first and the project underneath. It just helps you, and it means you don't have to think every time. You have to fill those kind of things in, and it makes sure that you sound the same every time that you're doing it, because more often than not, funders will talk, and trustees are on other trustees' boards as well. And so maybe we'll come across your application forms more than once. So if you sound inconsistent, it's really helpful. Obviously, like we said, you have to tailor everything to the different trusts that you're applying to. But I honestly would start with a case for support, and that will help you answer that question with no problems, because you'll have everything at your fingertips. Amazing. Anybody got any other questions? We can always finish early, and I can let you go have your lunch early. I think AI, that question about AI was really, really interesting, Nikki, because it's something that's definitely I'm seeing more and more. I'm seeing more and more funders put statements out there about whether they will or won't accept applications written by AI. I'm not sure I'm quite there to write a whole application by AI. I'm not sure I'm quite that trusting of it yet, but it's definitely helpful. And I think that for small, like we said, for small organisations, AI can be an absolute lifesaver. You know, if you're a volunteer or you're the CEO trying to do everything. So further to the question we had about a good structure. Know that you mentioned funders like to see that there are direct link with our project being a solution to a problem cause. They avoid funding towards core costs. How would you emphasize the link? So I think if you're looking at a funder's criteria, then you need to be able to prove that you have the expertise and the solution to the problem that that funder wants to get behind and wants to put its funding behind. So you should be able to do that with the projects that you're having by the vision and mission of your organisation. You should be talking to your beneficiaries, as we've talked about before, to make sure that the solution you're putting forward really is what the beneficiaries need and that they'll find it beneficial. And I think that will really emphasise the link that you have with that funder and those priority funding. If you have successes that you can share from the projects that you're already doing and the impact those projects are having, amazing, put that in. If you have stats around the impact that your project will have, absolutely put impactful stats in. Show what you're going to do with their money. Don't just say, oh, we'll solve world hunger. Say how we're going to do that and the steps we're going to take to do that and the measures that you're going to put in place. Put your SMART objectives in so that they can see how you're going to get there and that you're a safe pair of hands. You're an expert in your field. You know what you're talking about. Why wouldn't they want to give you funding to help you do that? You know, that's what it's all about as trust fundraisers, isn't it? It's finding those funders and making sure that what we're doing is matching. And it's always us matching to it's always kind of not us matching to the funder. How can I put this? It's always making sure that your project matches with the funder and you're not changing your project to match, because it will stand out a mile unless you think it's a really, really close match and there are things that you can do. But it's all about making sure that you're a good match and that you know what you're talking about, that you have the expertise, and you can prove that to a potential funder. So Nikki says, would you use facts and figures, diagrams detailing outcomes in your case for support, or is there a better place to put them? Your case for support is your internal document, so you can put whatever you want into your internal document. If you find presenting facts and figures and diagrams in that way really beneficial, then you do it. You do whatever you need to. Case for support really shouldn't go outside of your organisation and be sent to funders. That should be used to then pull together your application, whether that's a 2-page letter, whether that's into an application form, however they want you to present it, or however you choose to present it. Cases for support can be a little bit too heavy. They don't always get to the point because they are literally a brain dump of your organisation and your project. So I would take your case for support and then turn that into an application letter. Facts and figures, absolutely. If you have facts and figures of things that you've done, so real live beneficiary data about what you're doing, absolutely pop those in, but make sure you're also telling the stories that go along with those facts and figures, because facts and figures show that you're an expertise and you know what you're doing and can prove that you've had success. But the stories are what are going to kind of prick at their hearts, really, and show the impact of the work that you're doing, or what would happen if you weren't there. Diagrams, if it's a really clear and easy way to show complex figures, absolutely pop diagrams in. But I would always go for more of the storytelling than the diagrams and things, unless it's a really complex subject that you need to explain. I think people buy from people, don't they? You know, sales will always tell you that. So tell those people stories, but back it up with the facts and the figures to show that you have that expertise. Phil, I really want to make more relationships with funders prior to application, but I don't feel I've quite got to grips with this. Quite often I'll email trusts and ask for a phone chat just for initial introduction, but then don't hear anything back. Do you tend to just ring up trusts number cold? Yes, I do. I do. Unless a trust absolutely says that they don't want to hear from you, either by email or by telephone, I would absolutely pick the phone up and try and speak to somebody. I try not to kind of chat about anything that is readily available on their websites, because if the information is there, but if there's information that's missing, sometimes funders don't put when the next trust meeting might be, when an application deadline might be, so you could ring up and ask those kind of things. You can ring up and ask what the average grant size is if it's not already out there. But yeah, I would pick up the phone and I would ring if they say that, you know, there's no, absolutely, please do not get in touch with me. And sometimes with small trusts that might not have their own website and might only be listed on the Charity Commission, you're often speaking to a trustee, and what better information could you get than from an actual trustee who makes those decisions? And if they then see your application come through and they remember the nice chat that they've had with you, Phil, you know, that's a really good warm inroad. And email's fine too. You know, we sometimes have to build ourselves up to picking up that telephone, don't we? But I would definitely, you know, just give it a go, see how it feels for you, see whether it feels natural. It will feel more natural the more that you do it. You will get some people that don't want to speak to you. It's just the way it is. But more often than not, I've had some really lovely chats with potential funders, and I've learned a lot more than I could any other way. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then email is fine. I often find you don't get as much response with an email. Some people are great and will email you back, no problem, but it's easier to ignore an email than it is to ignore the telephone. So I would just give it a try and see how it feels, and you do it. As long as they don't say that you can't, then there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't pick up a telephone. Don't let your, you know, nerves or worry about doing it hold you back. Like we were saying, be brave and give it a try. Pick one that you think, actually this would be fine if I ring this one, they won't mind, and give it a little go. And don't put too much pressure on yourself to do lots. You know, I remember once I had about 10 that I was going to ring. I was really ambitious that day. I was going to do 10. I was going to ring 10, and I rang the first 2. And the second one was the most grumpy person I've ever spoken to in my life. And I was like, do you know what? I'm not going to do the other 8 now. I'm going to leave that for another day, because it just, you know, sometimes these things can really break your spirits, can't they? So I was like, no, I'm going to do those another day. So maybe start with one or two a day, 1 or 2 a week, and build it up and see how you feel and how it goes. But I've had some really, really lovely chats And if you don't feel like picking up the phone, like I said before, you can find the Meet the Funder events, the Q&A events, and you can ask your questions there, you know, in a more of a public forum where they're actually geared up to have those questions come through and they want to hear from you. That's another great way of getting your organisation and name and face in front of people as well. It just really helps when you put your application in or when you're doing your next steps with them. You know, if you're successful, you've got a really good place to build that relationship from. That's great, everyone. Well, I hope you're all feeling a little bit more optimistic than maybe you were when we first joined. It is really tough out there, isn't it, everyone? But you're all doing an absolutely amazing job. Oh, we just have to keep going. We just have to keep going. It will get better, I promise. You're all doing amazingly well. So come across and link with me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the chat. And we will be doing this all again in April on the 29th, the same time. I try and keep them at the same time for everyone. So here's the link if anybody wants to come along and meet with me again in April. But it's been so lovely chatting with you. I will let you all go and have an early lunch or get back to your to-do list. But I really appreciate you all joining me. Thank you so, so much. Please do feel free to reach out if you've got any questions we didn't cover today. I am going to go for my lunch now, actually. I can't eat before I get too nervous. So I'm going to go have my lunch. I hope you all enjoy yours, and I shall see you all in April, I hope. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.